Call this meeting to order at 1:11 p.m. on this date, December 12th, 2023. My name is Harry Spikes. I am the chairman for the CHAP. And before I begin, I would like to allow everyone from my left in the room to introduce themselves. Eric, go right ahead.
Eric Holcomb, Executive Director.
Jill Dennis, Commissioner.
Catherine Good, Commissioner.
Peter Morrow, Commissioner.
Ann Powell, Commissioner representing Greater Baltimore Committee.
Cabal Lynn, Commissioner.
John Bullock, City Council Rep to the Commission.
Nicole Battle, Commissioner representing Real Estate Developer.
Myra Mendelea, Commissioner.
Garrett Power, Commissioner.
CHAP staff.
Lauren Chiswick, CHAP staff.
Tyreek Charlouse, CHAP staff.
Eddie Leon, CHAP staff.
Anthony Stewart, staff.
Caitlin Arnett, CHAP staff.
Thank you all. And once again, welcome to all who are in attendance. The mission of CHAP is to enhance and promote the culture and economy of Baltimore through the preservation of buildings, structures, sites, neighborhoods that have aesthetic, historic, and architectural value. The goals of CHAP include preserving historic architecture and monuments, reclaiming broken neighborhoods, preventing demolition by neglect, and integrating our city's past into its futures. We have a few housekeeping rules. Some of you are familiar with these rules and some of you are not. If you have a cell phone, which most of us do, please put it on vibrate or silent. If you have to take the call, please do not take the call here in the room. You can take it outside. Also, if you have any conversations, don't have the conversations in the room, you're welcome to have them in the hallway. Also, you might have seen two items outside. There's a sign-in sheet for the items that we have on the agenda. The sign-in sheet allows you the opportunity to speak. We also have an agenda outside. If you want to know the order in which we'll be operating today, the agenda's outside as well. So for this, we usually, and we always do, we give people 3 minutes to speak. However, when I put my gavel up like this, that means you have 30 seconds left. Very rarely do I have to use it, but it's just only a warning sign. But if I do, you know what you got to do, okay? Other than that, thank you. I would like to make a motion to waive the reading of the... Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Are there any corrections or additions that need to be made to the minutes? Seeing none, I'd like to make a motion to adopt the minutes. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Minor work applications processed by staff in the last month. We'll now go into due process and review procedures. CHAP reviews applications in conjunction with the building permit process of the permit section of the Department of Housing and Community Development. If a building permit applicant is filed prior to historic design review, the applicant is placed on hold pending completion of the CHAP review process. The review process is completed by issuing an authorization to proceed. The historic design review process is in addition to other applicable laws and regulations and does not diminish the force of urban renewal plans, building codes, zoning codes, etc. It is the applicant's responsibility to comply with applicable laws, regulations, and codes. Proposed projects are reviewed prior to issuing a building permit. Applicants must comply with the Baltimore City Historic Preservation Design Guidelines in planning and executing their projects. Design review considers the proposed work taking into consideration the historical and architectural character of the structure and of the immediate area. Applicants will need to clearly explain how their project complies with the design guidelines. Minor projects. In order to expedite the application process, the Commission has a designated review authority to the Executive Director for cases involving minor work. Minor projects must not significantly change the overall appearance or remove the significant undamaged historic fabric. All minor work must clearly meet the design guidelines. Major projects. Major projects may change the overall character, appearance, and integrity of the structure. Substantial building alterations, demolitions, additions, and new construction are considered major projects and are reviewed at public hearings. Interested parties should request a pre-development meeting in the planning department to begin the review process. As electronic version of all materials must be submitted to the CHAP staff at least 25 calendar days prior to the public hearing date. If the application is complete, the project shall be scheduled for a public hearing. CHAP hearings. At the public hearing, CHAP staff presents recommendations to the Commission regarding the project. Following the staff presentation, the applicant may make a presentation to the commission. Interested parties, including neighborhood associations, have the opportunity to provide public testimony. Following testimony, the commission renders a decision on the application at the public hearing. Persons aggrieved by this decision of the commission may seek judicial and appellate review in accordance with the Baltimore City Code. After an authorization to proceed is issued, the applicant may obtain a building permit. The commission's process is impartial, and staff's comments are evidence that assist the commission in rendering the decision. I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the final agenda.
So moved.
Do I have a second? Second. All in favor? Aye. Let us begin.
Who was second?
Commissioners, we do not have a consent agenda, so we'll go right into our regular agenda. Councilman Bill number 23-0447, landmark list 3110 Elm Avenue, request a designation as a Baltimore City landmark. Councilmember Odette Ramos as the applicant, and the staff is Lauren.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This should be familiar to you since we considered this as a potential landmark in September. So I'm going to try to breeze through this as quickly as possible, just hitting the highlights. The request is to designate this property as a Baltimore City landmark. The applicant is Councilmember Odette Ramos. The owner is Richard Wimbrough, and I, Lauren Chisholm, staff. The property is located in Hamden, overlooking the Jones Falls River Valley. Originally, this property, which you can see here, had been part of the Mount Vernon Mill Company. It's in an interesting sort of neighborhood setting that has both a mix of residential and industrial uses. And you can see that this property is really sort of at that intersection of the transition from residential to industrial, from east to west. And you can see here, this is the old Florence Crittenden home, which is located immediately adjacent to this property, that was originally the mill owner's home in the neighborhood. And this is just some neighborhood context sort of showing sort of the view sheds from the building and how the building interacts with the neighborhood. And in fact, some redevelopment that was approved by this commission, not this specific body, because it was several years ago, but the redevelopment on the Florence Crittenden property right across the street had residential row houses that were designed to sort of mirror the industrial nature of this building. So they were built to be in context with this structure. Oh, sorry. And you can see here, these are just some of the industrial buildings that surround this property. It's a brick industrial building that has 3 street fronting elevations with the primary facade facing east on the 3100 block of Elm Avenue, and the other elevations facing Falls Cliff Road to the west and 32nd Street to the north. It's a handsome building. It has a lot of detailed brickwork, cast concrete, limestone on all 3 of the elevations that are publicly facing. And certainly there has been some infill and alterations to some of the window openings, but overall it retains a high degree of integrity, which you can see here. As I mentioned before, this was originally on the property of the Mount Vernon Company. Since the 1850s, if not earlier, Mount Vernon Company had extensive land holdings along the Jones Falls, which you can see here. This is the property in 1896, and I have the X sort of marking where this property is located today. And you can see the Florence Crittenden Mansion located there, which is now a Baltimore City landmark. There's a Florence Crittenden Mansion as well. Again, this was originally part of the mill owner's home, where sort of on his porch on the hillside, he could look over all of his land holdings, his mills, his mill workers' homes. It was a total institution, and he could sort of watch all of it from his front porch. Following a labor strike in 1923, the Mount Vernon Mill Company sold off a lot of property, including Clipper Mill, what became the Florence Crittenden home, and the majority of the workers' housing in 1925. The workers' housing had been provided free to the workers, but then it was sold off essentially to intentionally displace them and punish them for their labor strikes. And you can see that this lot is visible on this 1928 Sanborn map. It had a planned street going through the middle of the property, but that never actually occurred. John H. Ferguson purchased the two lots in 1930, consolidated them, and at the start of the Great Depression, constructed this factory. The architect of the factory was Frederick Thomas, a Baltimore architect who at the time had designed over a dozen homes in the exclusive and exclusionary neighborhoods of Guilford, Homeland, and Bologna Giddings. And he ultimately designed over 24 homes in those neighborhoods and later designed a variety of religious and municipal structures and served as the architect for the park board. And both the contractor and structural engineer for the project were leaders in their trade. The building has housed several industries over the past 90 years. It first housed the English American Tailoring Company, which still exists today, is located in Westminster. And from 1937 to 1974, the factory housed the Monumental Printing Company, which was the business of the man who constructed this factory. And then it was rented to other companies as well, a variety of uses, which sort of speaks to sort of the change in typology of factory buildings, that this was a type of factory building that allowed for a variety of uses and sort of multifunctional, multi-purpose space, whereas historically factories really were constructed to only serve sort of one use. A little bit of contextual history. This building really represents the, really represents how this building is an example of an important shift in industry in the 20th century. Until the early 20th century, until the end of World War II, textile industry was dominant industry in Hamden and really in Baltimore. It was a tremendous industry. Mount Vernon Mill number 1 and 3 served as the headquarters for Mount Vernon Woodbury Mills, which was one of the world's largest manufacturers of cotton duck. And this property, this mill and the mill village that surround it was really designed to create a total institution, having mill villages that meant that the people who worked there relied on the company for absolutely everything, for their education, for their housing, for food, all of it, which made it far riskier for workers to strike or organize because they could lose their social networks, their homes, along with their job. The labor organizing in the last quarter of the 19th century in Hamden and Woodbury happened in spite of those, conditions. And it was actually, they were very successful in the early 20th century. They were able to advocate for wage increases, recognition of unions, et cetera. The labor striking worked, but only to a point, because then the mill owners finally decided to eventually move south and, where to states where there weren't as strong workers protections laws. So, they won the battle, but they lost the war. And so what's interesting is that after that, after the companies started moving south in the 1920s, it totally devastated the economy of Hamden and along the Jones Falls, because this major business was not there. And that function of sort of, a very large multi-structure, business no longer worked. And so what happened is that it's sort of the industry shifted and changed to allow for more multi-purpose structures like this one that you see here, that was built sort of as a light industrial building that could be built immediately adjacent to row homes, that provide, that did manufacturing that was, not as dangerous, not as toxic, that could be adjacent to the residences of the people who work there. Sherry Olson, Baltimore historian, said that it was a revisioning of the city where, quote, industry would be set in a park, workers and neighbors would enjoy daylight houses and clean air. And this building really represents that, in both its location as well as its design. So this was originally initiated as a potential landmark designation request in December 2022. The commission considered the potential landmark designation in September of 2023 and recommended approval. So this property is protected under the potential landmark designation. And following that, the council member introduced the actual legislation, which would offer protection and historic designation of this property in perpetuity. Currently, the potential landmark designation offers a time-limited protection and designation. So CHAP staff applies the guidelines for historic designation. We have 4 separate options. It's 4 different criterion that we can utilize for considering designation, and a property can meet 1 or more. And staff has determined that this property meets criterion 1 and 3, associated with events that have made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of Baltimore history, or that embody the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction, or that represent the work of a master, or that possess high artistic values, or that represent a significant and distinguishable entity whose components may lack individual distinction. Essentially, it's architectural value. For neighborhood comments, the property is not located within a CHAP district, so we don't have architectural review committee comments. Staff did notify community associations and citizens in the vicinity of the property. And in the past, for the potential landmark designation, staff received over 24 letters in support of this designation. Councilmember Ramos submitted a letter of support of this designation, which she is sponsoring. Her letter is available on the Wix site. This morning, staff received 3 letters regarding this designation from Rick Roebuck, C. William Schneidereth, and J. Goldshire. Rick Roebuck recommended that the building be named for the most recent long-term tenant of the building, Free State Printing. Mr. Schneidereth and Jay Goldshire essentially stated that this building should not be designated as historic for its association with the Monumental Printing Company, and that is not staff's recommendation for the designation. It's not for its association with that company, so staff does not see any issue with that. I went too forward, sorry. So yeah, staff recommends that this building be designated as a Baltimore City landmark. It's an excellent example of post-World War I industrial development in the residential neighborhoods of Baltimore City. This development pattern became a strong economic force and a character-defining element in many neighborhoods of the city, and the property represents the industrial diversification in Hamden when many of the longstanding industries were becoming obsolete, showing how Hamden reinvented itself from a 19th century industrial mill village to an industrial city neighborhood. And it's an excellent example of 1920s, 1930s industrial architecture in Baltimore City. And the building is largely unchanged from 1930 and retains sufficient physical integrity to convey its historic association. Staff recommends a finding of approval for this designation of the property as a Baltimore City landmark with a friendly amendment for the legislation to change the name to Monumental Printing Company Factory. Thank you, commissioners. Any questions?
Lauren, thank you. Commissioners, do you have any questions for Lauren? Okay. Lauren, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Adele Ramos, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, afternoon, members, and hello to my colleague. For the record, I'm Odette Ramos, Councilwoman for the 14th District. I represent this area. I'm asking for your support for a second time. Thank you all for supporting the potential landmark status. This would make it permanent. The emails that we got this morning about the name, I'm happy to work with staff on what that looks like. Free State, the last known is totally fine with me. And you saw the designation relative to the architecture as well as the building's importance in Baltimore is similar to what we saw with other buildings that are designated historic in that area. So this seems very consistent, and I would appreciate your support on that. The other piece that we mentioned in the last hearing is that there is a 100-year-old chimney that comes out of the building, which is the home of the chimney swifts as they come in to roost. And if you haven't seen that, it's past the season now, so you'll have to see it next spring. But it is really, truly a sight to behold. And so this designation would also preserve that as well. And obviously, we know that making this available for landmark status also makes it available to eligible for CHAP tax credits for redevelopment. So we're asking for your favorable report. Thank you very much.
Councilwoman, thank you. Any questions for the councilwoman? Okay, Councilwoman, thank you so much.
Thank you.
On our list, we only have, we have 3 people that signed up. Only one person wants to testify. That person's name is Alice. Alice, are you here? And Alice, I didn't want to pronounce your last name wrong, so for the record, could you pronounce your first and last name?
I'm Alice Greeley Nelson, and I am here on behalf of the Birds. And I testified last time, and I just wanted to make sure that the historic designation would also cover the chimney. I've been monitoring the chimney swifts for over 35 years, and it's a very important designation for the migratory pattern for the birds. So, thank you.
Ms. Alice, thank you. Thank you. Before we get into our motion, Commissioners, do you have any conversation for this topic? Okay. Oh, go right ahead, Ann.
So do we need to expand do we need to be more specific in the designation to cite the chimney? We don't usually, okay, I just, that was it.
Okay. Okay. So the recommendation, staff recommends a finding of approval for the designation of this property as Baltimore City landmark with a friendly amendment to change the name to Monumental Printing Company. Who would like to put the motion forward? Do I have a second? Cool. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? The ayes have it. Thank you. Next on our agenda, the Compass, 206 through 226 West Fayette Street, 101 through 121 North Howard Street, 201 through 231 West Lexington Street, and 106 Park Avenue, 5 and Dime Historic District. The request, concept review of new construction and rehabilitation, applicant Westside Partners, LLC. Staff is Caitlin.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. So I have to present to you the concept review for new construction and rehabilitation for the Compass. Here you can see the 5 and Dime Historic District in blue and the site outlined in orange. As you can note, this takes up the majority of the 5 and Dime Historic District. And here it is as an aerial image, so you can better understand what's standing and where there is an open lot along the south side. And here's a diagram that the applicant completed that's helpful in understanding what the actual scope of the project. So while we often speak of it as an entire block, there are several buildings that are not within the scope of the project, and those are shown here. So the buildings at the corner of Fayette and Park are not within the scope, and those along Howard near the intersection with Marion Street are not within the scope. So just some quick background, and this just going to the recent background. So in July of this year, CHAP, at that CHAP hearing, the commission heard a demolition hearing 2 request for 220 222 and 224 West Fayette, and 105 and 107 North Howard. At this time, the commission denied the request and asked that the applicant return with a plan to retain portions of the historic buildings and more information on the cost to retain portions of the historic buildings. Then, at the August 8th CHAP hearing, the applicant provided the additional information, and the commission approved the request to fully demolish 220, 222, and 224 West Fayette, and careful demolition and salvage of 105 and 107 North Howard. And so this diagram shows where the commission has approved demolition, and also where there is the intention to retain the facades along Howard Street. And then in October of 2023, due to the scale of the project, planning staff requested that the applicant go to UDAP for a master plan review. That occurred in October, and at the meeting, the panel made the following recommendations. This is just a brief summary, which included the understanding that the project will never be viewed in its entirety, and that each building needs to be able to stand on its own. Additionally, they urged the team to figure out the identity of the project and clearly show how one would experience this. Specifically along the south side where there are no historic buildings to help ground the new construction. So the team has modified the design in response to the UDAP comments, and here's just, again, another diagram they've shared that shows the previous massing. You can see on the left-hand side, and then the revised one responding to UDAP's comments. So for the proposal, the applicant proposes to complete infill construction and rehabilitation within the block bound by Howard Street to the west, Lexington Street to the north, Park Avenue to the east, and Fayette Street to the south. The block is bisected by Marion Street, which runs east-west, and which is currently and historically has served as an alley. This diagram shows the extent of the demolition and new construction, as well as where facades and entire buildings will be retained. So in order to make this a functional project, many of the rear and side buildings will be consolidated to create clear floor spans that will be utilized for apartments, et cetera. The parking will all be along the south side within an interior parking garage that will not be visible from the street, and it will not impact historic buildings. And this diagram shows how the programs were grouped within the site and how they respond to the surrounding context. I thought this was important just to kind of ground the commission in some of the understanding of why certain things are where, et cetera. So you can see on the north along Lexington, it's been identified as retail, event, and hospitality. And then if you turn the corner to Park, it's office and transition space. Along the south, living and retail. And along the west, art, history, and culture. So I'm going to jump into the review, and I'm kind of going to do it in groupings that make sense. So the team has been great in providing very clear images that show what's being proposed. So I'm kind of going around the block as they have. So I'm going to start off with 220 to 226 West Fayette and 101 through 107 North Howard Street. Here's an image of what's existing today from Howard and Fayette Street looking northeast. The properties on this south side of the block, south of Marion Street, consist of buildings that have been approved for demolition and 2 facades that will be incorporated into the new construction. So the team provided this diagram, which shows where buildings will be demolished, which buildings are out of the scope, and where facades will be retained. So the applicant proposes a 4 to 5 story office building at the corner of Howard and Fayette Streets that incorporates the twin historic masonry facades at 107 and 105 North Howard Streets. The new construction is proposed to be a contemporary building that matches the scale of the buildings along Howard Street. The new construction will exceed the height of the facades and is set back from the historic cornice line. The design emphasizes vertical lines using fins that closely match the height of the adjacent buildings. The building will have ground floor retail and office uses in the upper floors. Further down West Fayette Street, the form is set back from the street to provide outdoor space that will serve as a ground floor cafe. And this allows the unique design to curve around the side of the building. The applicant has shared some precedent images that show the design intent for the building. So you can see here, kind of how they want to move forward. So moving north along Howard Street, this is 117, 119, and 121 North Howard. These are a set of unique historic buildings that match one another in height, but have very different materials and styles. Previously, the buildings were kind of consolidated with a continuous modern storefront that extended to the second floor. This has created an unknown condition at the first and second floors. So you can see here, the applicants have identified that they intend to remove the applied corrugated and sheet metal facade to better understand the condition beyond that. And here's the proposal. The intent is to retain the facades as well as a return along the side elevations, and then have a new addition that would be completed in masonry that would extend above the cornice line and be set back from the front of the buildings. Additionally, the intent is to restore the facade if possible or reinstate an appropriate facade once the condition is understood. And again, here are some precedent images that show the design intent for this area. Next up is the building at 231 West Lexington Street. This is the former Reed's Drug Store, located at the corner of Howard and Lexington Streets. The existing four-story building has been long vacant, and during the city's ownership, a non-historic shed roof was constructed to protect the building. As you can see on the right-hand side, the applicant is showing that their intent is to remove the non-historic roof and to restore the historic marquee and display cases. So here's the image of the proposal, as well as some precedent images to show how they intend to amplify that design. So the building will be transformed into an event space that utilizes the building to the east, 227 West Lexington Street, as ancillary space. So these are the buildings from 215 to 227 West Lexington. Does this work? Yeah, okay. So 227 West Lexington Street. This is the historic two-story building. Let's see if there we go. It includes some non-historic alterations to the storefront, but it is largely intact. 233 West Lexington, excuse me, is, let's see here. This set here. It's composed of what appears to be 2 or 3 historic buildings, 3-story buildings. I didn't dive into the history here, but they're definitely unique, and there's some better images in a minute. Non-historic alterations to the storefront extend to the second floor, where corrugated and sheet metal obscure the historic facade. And then the next building over is 215, 217, and 219 West Lexington, and it appears as a single historic 3-story building. And the first floor has been modified with some non-historic alterations to the storefront, but again, it's largely intact. So you can see here the intent along the facades for alterations. At the storefront, the intent is to remove those non-historic alterations to allow the storefronts to return to their historic use and appearance. At the upper levels, the intent is to repair the historic fabric that's there. And the 3 buildings connected, there is the intent to restore the historic cornice. So for 227 West Lexington Street, the proposal incorporates the building into the event space at Reed's Drug Store. And the non-historic storefront elements will be removed, and the storefront will be restored. It's largely unchanged. For 223 West Lexington Street, the applicant proposes to modify the buildings by removing the non-historic storefront elements, reintroducing appropriate storefronts, repairing the intact facade above the storefront, and restoring the historic cornice. The proposal includes a 3-story vertical addition that is not set back from the building. And the proposed use includes residential lobby and retail space with residential above. Oh, sorry. And then for 215 to 219 West Lexington, the applicant proposes to remove the non-historic alterations and repair the existing facade, including the sign band above the first floor. The condition of the interior of the building is unknown, and the redevelopment strategy is dependent on a structural study. The building will include ground floor retail and a club space. And here's some images, again, showing the design intent for this portion of the project. Located at the corner of Lexington Street and Park Avenue, the property at 201 West Lexington Street is the former Brager Gutman's department store. The building includes 2 8-story masses, one each on Lexington Street and Park Avenue, with a 4-story mass that connects the two at the corner. Along Park Avenue, this transitions from a highly ornamented and finished appearance to one with a more industrial back of house appearance. You can kind of see that. Let's see here, right here. Let's see, okay. So the intent with the Brager Gutman building is largely a restoration project. So at the upper floors, they would maintain and repair the existing facade. At the lower levels, the non-historic elements that have been introduced at the storefronts, including sheet metal, tile covering, and plywood, would be removed. The applicant proposes to maintain the existing massing, which will be used as a hotel with ground floor retail, and the non-historic elements would be removed and the historic material restored. And here are some precedent images that shows the design intent for that space. And our last section here is 206 West Fayette Street and 106 North Park Avenue. These are currently located on vacant lots with no existing buildings. These vacant lots surround the historic buildings located at the corner of Park Avenue and Fayette Street that are not within the scope of the project. The applicant proposes a 15-story, or at least that's what I thought of, I think it actually is 16-story residential building at this location that will face both Park and Fayette Streets. Along Park, this form is reduced to 11 stories. The mid-rise form is intended to act as a transition piece between the mid and high-rise buildings to the east within the central business district and the lower scale forms to the west. This contemporary design uses light colored materials to differentiate it from the historic buildings, which are generally darker in color. And the design is characterized by vertical lines and an ordered facade. Along Park Avenue, a large-scale graphic is integrated into the design above the building entrance and provides visual interest. Balconies are located along Park Avenue and at transition points within the design. A 404 vehicle parking garage will be integrated into this building, and it will be accessible to cars from Marion Street. There will not be any proposed curb cuts onto Fayette Street or Park to serve this garage, but the pedestrian entrance will be from Fayette Street. So here's a view along Fayette Street showing the lobby entrance, and you can also see here kind of the back of the building at Howard and Fayette that I spoke about first. And here are those precedent images that show the design intent for this portion of the building or the project. And I'll end here just kind of an overview of the entire proposal, showing the various uses that are proposed. Just kind of give a broad overview of what's going on here. So next up is the application of design guidelines. So I'll start off with Chapter 1.1, identifying and preserving historic building fabric. So at a concept level, the proposal meets these guidelines. Generally, the applicant proposes to retain, repair, and restore the historic elements at the many historic buildings within the project scope. As the project moves forward, more detailed information will be necessary to complete the review, including but not limited to intentions to remove historic elements such as windows and doors, specifications for replacement materials, existing conditions for inaccessible historic facades, etc. So the majority of the rehabilitation review will occur at a later date. Next is Chapter 1.17, alterations and additions. So I applied this guideline to two portions of the project where there are proposed vertical additions. So at 117 to 121 North Howard, the proposed vertical addition and rear construction generally meets the guideline. The applicant intends to retain and repair the historic elevations, as well as limited returns along either side elevation. The vertical addition will be set back from the front of elevation and will have limited visibility, allowing the historic facades to read as they were intended historically. The side elevations will be completed with masonry where they are visible, and an alternative materials will be further set back. I think more information is needed to understand what the setback is and if there's a potential to greater increase the setback to reduce the visibility of that vertical addition. The other area where this guideline was applied was at 223 West Lexington Street. The proposal includes a 3-story vertical addition at the property that does not meet this guideline. Completed in a contemporary design, the addition is not set back from the property line, which competes for attention with the historic facade of the property and is not sympathetic to the character of the historic building. Next, I applied Chapter 2.1, Guiding Principles for New Design. And I applied these to the ground-up new construction. So for the building at the corner of Howard and Fayette, the proposed new construction here largely meets this guideline. The proposal is for a contemporary design that is of its current time and place, appropriate for this district, which is home to a wide variety of architectural styles from many different time periods. The scale of the building relates to the adjacent building, as does the proposed color of the fins, which visually connect the new construction to the surrounding masonry. Get to that next. Okay. And then the proposal includes large-scale new construction along West Fayette Street and extending to Park Avenue. Generally, the proposed new construction meets the guidelines as the contemporary design has a clear visual order that helps it relate to the surrounding architecture, which again has a wide variety of styles. The alternative color and materials are clearly contemporary, allowing this building to not compete with the more varied design of the surrounding historic buildings. How the building meets the ground and the character of the entrances needs further study. So next up was Chapter 2.2 Site Design and Chapter 2.4.1 Building Features. The proposal meets these guidelines. The retained buildings will all maintain their activated ground level use and entries. The new construction is oriented to the street and will help to further the pattern of entries found in the area. Careful consideration should be paid to the cafe seating area and residential lobby along West Fayette Street, as this is the one place where the buildings are set back from the street facing property line. And as for the building features item, generally the concept for this proposal meets the guidelines as the program calls for small retail and commercial tenants at the ground floor, which will replicate the building features found historically. However, more detail will need to be reviewed once it is developed and once unknown conditions are better understood. Next up was Chapter 2.3, Scale and Form. I have this image here that shows the view east on West Lexington Street. Is that correct? Yeah. And here's a variety of images. The diagram at the top was provided by the applicant and shows how the site is in this transition zone between the high-rise and mid-rise structures within the central building business district and the mid-rise and smaller scale to the west side. So while the new construction is much taller than the historic buildings within the block, the proposed height relates to its larger context within downtown. There are mid and high-rise buildings located to the east, and the new construction to the west is smaller scale as appropriate. The proposed heights of the new buildings in the project are intended to provide that transition between the two parts of downtown, and the vertical additions are generally set back to allow the historic buildings to maintain their form as seen from the street. There is no neighborhood architectural review committee, although actually one has been started with the Market Center Merchants Group. A notice was sent to Downtown Partnership of Baltimore, the Market Center Merchants Association, Mount Vernon Belvedere Association, and Baltimore Heritage. No comments have been received to date, but I believe many people are here, not many, but several people are here to speak. The proposed new construction and rehabilitation of the historic building largely meets Chapter 1, Chapter 2, and Chapter 2 of the Historic Preservation Design Guidelines. In order to fully meet the design guidelines, the applicant should alter the proposal to set back the proposed new vertical addition along West Lexington Street and potentially set the vertical addition along North Howard Street further back as well. Additionally, the applicant should provide more information on the pedestrian experience along West Fayette Street, specifically at the cafe, and at the connection between the two new building forms along West Fayette Street. So staff recommends concept approval for the proposal with the following conditions. 1, that all rehabilitation work be reviewed as specifics are known. This includes areas both currently inaccessible and undeveloped. 2, the applicant alters the proposal to further set back the vertical addition along West Lexington Street to provide a clear hierarchy to the design with historic elevations as the most important element. 3, that the applicant modify the new construction at the corner of North Howard Street and West Fayette Street to more clearly accentuate that first floor retail space. And 4, to provide more information on the lobby, entrance, and cafe seating along West Fayette Street, as this needs to be an intentional space that has clear connections to the interior of the building. And what's not on here, but I referenced earlier, and I think maybe you all could have as a friendly amendment, would be to investigate a further setback for the properties along North Howard Street. Any questions?
Caitlin, thank you. Any questions? Garrett, go right ahead.
What happens to that space?
That is a great question for the applicant.
Any other commissioners? Yes, Catherine.
So, in the center of the block, if you go back to there, so in the center, the parking garage there that's in the center, when we're looking at the kind of bird's eye view from the top, there's a green space in the center. So that green space is on top of the parking garage.
A portion of the parking garage and a portion of the residential space, because as it crosses over Marion Street, it would be there. And it's accessible to the residents.
Okay, so the garage goes below and above ground both.
I'm not positive that it goes below the ground floor. So the green space is at a roof level.
Okay.
So that is.
That's just what I wanted to make sure.
Okay,
Green
yeah.
space is at the roof level.
This is the ground level right here. So this is the site plan of the ground level. So there's no green space here except for that minor cafe seating along Fayette Street, which will have some greenery. All the green space that you see in those aerial views are at the rooftop.
Okay. If there aren't any other questions for you, Caitlin, is the applicant here?
Yes.
Yep.
By all means. Give us your full name.
Hi, Commissioners. My full name is Chris Janion. I'm with Westside Partners. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with this project as we've been in front of you on many occasions. We saw these blocks as one of the most important and impactful opportunities in the city to help forward a positive narrative and continue the momentum transitioning what was the CBD into a mixed-use and vibrant downtown. We began the process by talking to a bunch of different stakeholders. I've got them all written out here, but there are 20 plus. I'm happy to go through them if needed, but they were all over the city, from residents associations to the state, the mayor's office, to institutions and small businesses. Discussing this project with these groups was paramount in forming our concept and program for both of these two blocks, including the density and style. Our strategy is to concentrate on creating special experiences for everyone living in, working in, or visiting our project and the neighborhood around it. We aim to create a cohesive connection between downtown to the east, the Hippodrome, Everyman, and Lexington Market to the west, CFG Bank Arena to the south, and the rest of the Bromo to the north. We looked at the whole neighborhood context, not just internally on our project, but hopefully we'll continue the renaissance of the Bromo into one of the coolest downtown arts districts in the country. Now, what I wanted to kind of address was the program and the couple of comments that we had heard on the setbacks. Our goal for this project was to obviously maximize the impact and the density of what we could while being respectful of the historic district and the neighborhood around it. We chose on Lexington to have a modern addition over one part of a historic building, as opposed to creating more density and going up farther. But the site was small, north to south, so we really wanted to maximize that space. It worked for both efficiency and construction type for us to be going up top, but we also really wanted to show, I think we kind of skipped over some of the precedents, but there were a handful of precedents that showed a really wonderful modern addition over a historic building that had been done all over the country and internationally, I think successfully. So besides hiding the fact that we are actually putting an addition onto it, where inevitably at some point you're gonna see it, we wanted to make sure that we were respecting but also making proud the modern addition above it. The addition on Howard Street is set back, and from the street aspect, you are not going to be able to see it. So again, this was the one particular place that financially, economically, and I think design-wise, where it really worked to the benefit of the project to have come up to the front. And I'll leave it at that for any questions and comments.
Thank you. Commissioners, do you have any questions for Octave? Yes, ma'am.
Are these lots being consolidated into like 2 lots or something?
So right now, we're looking at consolidating, because some of these properties, I mean, even within one of them, have like 3 different addresses. So we're looking at consolidating per use, per kind of high-end use. So like the residential building will be consolidated into the residential building, the hotel to the hotel, and so on.
Okay. Okay. I was just curious because I saw lots of what would be lot line windows. And so that's where I was like, I didn't understand.
We were very cognizant of the percentages that.
But it's my understanding you can't have any lot line windows. But I can also ask these questions to the architect.
Yes, yes, so the consolidation is going to take care of the window lines.
Okay, I just was curious. Okay.
Any other commissioners? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
On our list, we have only one person who's signed up to testify. First name is Chris. I'm not going to butcher the last name. Chris, are you here?
I am here.
Oh, Chris. Then there it was. Thanks again, Chris. So we will now, I'll turn it over to the commissioners for conversation as we deliberate. Go right ahead. Anyone like to have a comment? Yes, sir.
Regarding the second recommendation from staff to basically increase the setback on the Lexington Avenue residential portion, perhaps it would be best actually, could we go back to the rendering?
Yep.
The proposed rendering. Thank you. I would say that I think that the design as shown is making a lot of effort to articulate the difference between what's below and what's above, and I wouldn't insist upon a setback farther than that. I think they've done the work, and I see just in general around the perimeter of the site, I'm seeing an effort made to make the bottom 2 or 3 levels more prominent in keeping with the character of the district. So I think they've done what they need to there.
Sir, thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Kyle.
While I agree with you, my only concern is that typically with the design guidelines, we require the setback from the historic buildings. So I'm just concerned about setting a precedent in this case, I think it is designed well and fairly transparent and coordinates with the bottom three buildings. So the rhythm and the way it's done, I think, is done very well. My only concern is that we set a precedent for other people to all bring their additions forward to the exterior facade. That's my only concern.
I think
Okay,
precedent's
Kyle.
already been set. There's been many buildings that we've allowed to be flush with the facade, so I think that this group is doing a better job than the ones that we've approved before. So I would second that. I think this is a better iteration of how to do it. And I would be okay to strike that for recommendation.
Okay. Anyone else? Catherine?
I have a concern on a different part. If
What
I
part? Go
wanna
right
make
ahead. Which
sure we're
part?
done here.
Go ahead.
Okay. So can we go to the kind of bird's eye? Okay.
Catherine, excuse me 1 second. For all those in the crowd, as I said before, if there's any conversation, please have it in the hallway. Thank you.
So my question might go back to the owner, the architect. I was wondering, these buildings here, are they about the same height as the proposed structure here? Or is the proposed taller, shorter?
I think they're generally around the same height,
Okay,
same number of stories.
okay.
And then you can clearly see some of the ones in the background are much taller.
Right, yeah, I was just, some of the angles we've seen, it was hard to really figure out how close they were.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So can we go to the one that shows the front view with the little tiny one-story to the right of the really tall one?
This one?
That one works. So I don't know how any of my fellow commissioners feel. I appreciate having the kind of small green space there to give that the really short building a little bit of room to breathe. But that said, so many other places on site, there's a really great effort to kind of step down the scale to kind of help transition to the building next to it. And this, to me, is the only place that misses. And so it's kind of this behemoth overshadowing, this little row house or store property, whatever there is to the right. I do think the small green space helps to give it a little bit of breathing room. And I understand the building site for the tall building is fairly limited, so there might not be very much options for trying to kind of get a stepped down mass. But I'm just wondering if there might be some way with how even the building reads kind of behind that little green space, just to help give some smaller scale. Any other?
Kevin, thank you. Caitlin, can you, if there, are there any more comments from this, commissioners? Okay, Caitlin, can you send us to your recommendation page, please? Okay, so commissioners, I'm not gonna read all 1 through 4, but I do wanna know, Caitlin, at the end of your presentation, you did mention one additional recommendation that Eric and we wrote down, but.
So it was dealing with setbacks, just to further explore that setback along Howard Street, which looked like it was minimally visible. We don't have a dimension for how much it's set back, if it's set back 5 feet, could we look at 8 feet and see how that changes it? More of just an exploration of what the setback is along Howard Street.
Okay, Caitlin, thank you.
For item number 2, I meant it's to add to the setback not just West Lexington Street, but also North Howard, where there's the,
That one's already set back.
it's slightly
just-
set back, but again, dimensions weren't provided. So it's kind of like, how far set back is it? Renderings kind of lie, like I'd like to maybe see a drawing with dimensions
Gotcha.
to better understand what's going on.
It's not disallowing setback, it's just wanting to define that better.
Just to get some more information and explore it.
Okay, okay.
What's number 3 about again?
Could we see an image of the, with the building that number 3 applies to, please?
Sorry, this is the new construction at Howard and Fayette. It's the curved building. Let me get to it, sorry.
Okay.
This one. So there was some concern at staff level that the retail might be hard to understand if you only have the corner entrance. And I think the site plan shows that there will be retail along the south side as well. So maybe working with signage or additional canopies to clearly identify or kind of create that space at the first floor. But again, it's more of like a explore this.
Okay, okay. Go ahead, Ann.
So when I look at so one question, this is a 4-story building, correct?
So again,
mass. It's
at
a
a very
4-story mass.
conceptual level, they did not share the number of stories
Okay.
that were for here. So I'm guessing it's 4 to 5. But
Okay, so it looks like it's 4. I'm seeing 4. I would just be curious. I think it's it's not near the Radius drugstore building because it's not on Lexington, but it immediately evokes that Radius corner that's on Lexington and Park.
Kresge.
The interruption of the storefront along, is it Fayette? I don't know. I don't know that bothers me because, it's clear on both ends, and then it allows the fins to come down and engage the body, which makes it that gives it a connected feeling. So that engagement, I think, offsets the lack of transparency, given how transparent the ends are. I think the relationship that's a little, that I question more might be the weight of the top relative to the base. It seems like there's a proportional, maybe if the fin structure kind of, could it maybe engage the height of the cornice, the historic cornice, then that would reset those
Yeah, the proportions would be better.
Yeah. So I would trade that comment for the, no, I'm just kidding. But
No, that's totally
yeah.
fine.
I just was curious what the kind of,
I agree with you.
Okay.
I agree as well about the proportionality of the top level to the rest of the building and about it's being okay to be interrupted as it comes down to the sidewalk level.
Okay, any other further comments? Okay. Kaylee, you can go back to the page. Oh, good, Garrett, you had your hand? Garrett, you had something to say? Okay.
Garrett, did you want to ask your earlier question about the event space?
I'm happy that they're just mysterious, but
Okay.
Gotcha.
event to be named later.
Kayla, thank you. With the recommendations on the screen and with the other recommendation that Eric wrote down that we just finished talking about, do I have a motion?
Can we clarify?
Sure, go right here. Go right ahead.
The only one I wanted to clarify was just to strike. Most of the comments here are things to work on.
Yes.
Which I think the team is probably at a stage that they have room to work on. I just want to strike something that disallows them to do something. So I think number 2 is the only one that says you need to push it back.
So we strike number 2.
My opinion, I don't think it's necessary. I think they've done a good job at developing a concept that actually works well at providing a good precedent of building an addition on top of the historic building. So
Okay, Pal,
I'd like
thank you.
to strike that motion, and the other ones are kind of concepts to work on.
And then 3, trade out
What's
for.
that? Oh, wait, there you go.
And number 3 is what you're talking about, trade out rather than the first floor retail space, look at engaging the cornice line. but
Well, maybe specifically looking at the proportion of the.
That was the height, right?
Upper level to the rest of the.
Right, that's what,
the-
okay.
So, basically 3 gets switched out for a different part of the
Right.
building.
Okay, okay.
So we're taking this 3 out and we're replacing it with explore the proportionality of the top level to
Okay.
the rest of the building.
Okay, thank you. 2 is extracted, 3 looks at the proportion, height, from the top and the bottom. With that being said, who would like to put the motion forward? I have one. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? The ayes have it, thank you.
So who made the motion?
Ann did first? You got the second, right?
Yeah.
And Sarah, yep. Finally, we have 1009 Charles Street, Federal Hill Historic District. The request demolition hearing 1, determination of architectural significance. The applicant is Henry Schofer, and the staff is Mr. Tyreek.
Thank you, commissioners, for being here. Thank you, everyone, for being here. All right, everyone, this is 1009 South Charles Street, located in the Federal Hill District. Federal Hill is known for its commercial structures, some with ornate storefronts, along with 2 primary thoroughfares, Light Street and Charles Street, which reflect a range of 19th and 20th century styles, a market, a few churches, and adaptive reuse high school, which are examples of institutional buildings within the district. All right. So this is demolition hearing 1. There's a determination of the architectural significance, and the applicant is Henry Schofer. We already heard of this. So here are the site conditions that we have for the structure. So the properties are located on the northwestern portion of the 1000 block of South Charles Street, with its rear elevation facing on Patapsco Street. 1009 South Charles, which originally 5 structures. 1007 South Charles Street, which is currently a 1-story structure. 1009 through 1011 South Charles Street, a full 2-story building. 1013 South Charles Street, which is connected to 1009 and 1011 by a 1-story storefront. 1009 through 1011, a rear addition that faces onto Patapsco Street, and 1013 South Charles Street, which is a rear addition that also faces onto Patapsco Street. Here's an aerial image of the conglomeration of buildings, 1007 being on the far left and 1013 being on the far right. All right, here's the site map. And here's the vicinity map showing its adjacency to Sharpland Hall to the west. All right, here are a few aerial photos of the property. All right, so for the architectural description, the current conglomeration of 5 buildings is a medium-sized parcel which fills in a small portion of the block. The South Charles Street facade of this structure reads as 3 distinct buildings: a 1-story remnant of a 2-story side gable building, a 2-story Italianate structure, and a 2-story plus attic building. A 1-story storefront ties in 1009 to 1011, and with 1013 South Charles Street. The 1-story remnant is ornamentally defined with a nice 1-story Italianate storefront cornice. The east boundary of the property abuts onto Patapsco Street, which is a typical alley street with a 2- and 3-story side gable and flat roof row homes. The parcel is flanked by 2.5-story row homes to the south. Yes, to the south, and a 1-story shed building to the north. The immediate vicinity provides a variety of building types and building uses, which include commercial, residential, and mixed uses. The portion of 1009 South Charles Street and 1007 South Charles Street is currently a 1-story remnant of a 2.5-story side gabled roadhouse that was modified with a 19th century Italianate cornice. The structure was partially demolished and stabilized in 2018 due to unsafe conditions, and this work was commissioned by DHCD. As you can see on the left, it will be that gray portion there. 1009 South Charles Street was a collection, this is like the same. All right. The two row houses on Patapsco Street have since been demolished. The existing building was part of a renovation to accommodate the commercial uses for the Chauffeur Furniture Store that is currently sitting vacant. The existing structure is a two-story brick row house with a flat roof sloped towards the rear. There are 4 louver windows applied with Baltimore bullnose trim at the second floor, a contemporary aluminum full-light front door, wood paneling at the storefront base, and a simple wood fascia board serving as the storefront cornice. The storefront includes vertical wood paneling that covers the remainder of the existing storefront. This vertical wood paneling also covers the bricked-in second-floor wood window openings. The front facade has been painted light beige with a dull green applied to the cornice and storefront wood material. There's a simple banner sign installed at the top of the vertical wood paneling that covers the signage board of the storefront. Baltimore bullnose trim and a historic storefront appear at the first floor as they are original features of the superstructure. At the rear, an addition was constructed sometime in the 20th century. The exterior wall facing Patapsco Street consists of brick finished with a coat of light gray stucco. There's a solid steel door and a round metal scupper and downspout in the northernmost portion of the wall. There's no original material at the rear of the property except possibly the brick that has been covered in stucco. The brick facade, window openings, cornice, roof pitch, and the existing structure has been consolidated into a superstructure and combined into one address. Directly south of 1009 and 1011 was the former 1013 South Charles Street building. This structure was consolidated with 1009 and 1011 sometime in the 20th century, which included the removal of the party wall between them. The former 1013 South Charles Street was originally built as a 2-story plus attic structure that looked like its pair at 1015 South Charles Street when it was originally built. It is most likely had a shallow side gabled roof that was rebuilt as a slanted flat roof. The elevation that faces Patapsco Street is currently a plain stucco wall without any windows or doors, well, with a still solid door. As far as the background, in June of 21st, 2018, CHAP issued an ATP for the removal of the roof after a roof collapse, removal of the second floor, retention of the storefront and the building cornice to install a tarp along the north exterior masonry wall, and stabilization of the structure at the first floor. This can be shown here on the left portion. There was also a demolition permit issued in 2018 for the emergency demolition of the wood structure at the second floor, and every effort was made to remove the storefront cornice and to preserve it for reinstallation for a new project. As you can see, the storefront has been retained for reinstallation. There were other permits issued for the cap-off of sanitation connections and for the stabilization of exterior walls of the leftmost structure you see there. The proposal today is to demolish the entire superstructure in its entirety. All right. So staff applied guideline 3.6, demolition hearing 1, determination of architectural significance to determine the architectural significance of this structure. Staff determined that there is, regarding the significance of the structure, I apologize. The structures on Patapsco Street are 2 of the newest structures on this parcel. 1009 South Charles Street was built as a single-family row home with a with a first-story storefront that was then converted into a furniture retail store. These structures were built in Baltimore to meet the demand of current trends in the 19th century. Then they were altered in the 20th century to meet the demands of the current trends of the time. In 1890, this area was home for a two and a half story and two three-story row homes. The three-story Italianate-style brick building with the two-story rear brick structure that is clad in stucco facing onto Patapsco Street was built to accommodate the use for the chauffeur furniture store, as you see here. Staff then applied 2.2 criteria for designating districts and landmarks, and we've used criterion 1 and 3, which we found that it fully meets these guidelines, and criterion 2, where it partially meets this guideline. Based on the architecture and history of the building and its surrounding context, it partially meets the criteria for designation. This development was part of the basic historic pattern of development within Federal Hill. Over time, the parcel has experienced a lot of change. Since the historic material on Patapsco Street is no longer existing, these structures no longer fit into that historic context. The structures on South Charles Street retain their historic material and still fit into the historic context of the district. Henry Schofer is a known person that has mildly shaped Baltimore's history. The development is not a work of a master, but it does embody high artistic values consistent with the Federal Hill District. The structures in question have also lost a lot of their architectural significance through extensive alteration and the replacement of its original building materials and elements. All right. So here are a few photos, as you can see, of the property. We will go through these later. The neighborhood comments. This property is located within the Federal Hill Historic District. Therefore, staff informed the Federal Hill ARC, who stated the majority of the ARC has no opposition to the demolition. Later, additional members of the neighborhood association reached out to CHAP to express their disapproval of the demolition of the Charles Street properties with no opposition to the Patapsco Street properties. All right, so staff reviewed the architectural and history of the building and determined that the structure partially meets the criteria for designation and thus is eligible for partial demolition under demolition hearing 1. So CHAP staff has analyzed 5 components of the structure separately. 1007 South Charles Street is only a 1-story remnant of a 2-story side gable structure. This portion of the building has lost all of its architectural significance except for the storefront's Italianate cornice. Staff believes that the applicant should preserve this cornice either by removal and reinstallation or by restoring it in place. 1009 to 1011 South Charles Street still retains its historic significance and should be preserved. The notable architectural features to be restored are the Italianate cornice and window openings. During rehabilitation, the applicant should conduct exploratory demolition to see what historic features are left of the first floor storefront. 1013 South Charles Street's facade still reads as a 2-story plus attic house. It still retains some historic character, and the applicant should make efforts to restore the facade of the second floor and attic portion. 1009 and 1011 South Charles Street addition that faces onto Patapsco Street has lost its historic character and may be demolished. 1013 South Charles Street addition that faces Patapsco Street has lost its historic character and may be demolished. Staff recommends that the structures at 1009 South Charles Street partially retain their architectural significance and partially contribute to the Federal Hill Historic District. with the following recommendations. Staff recommends a determination that the rear structures fronting onto Patapsco Street do not contribute to the historic district of Federal Hill and may be demolished. Staff further recommends that the one-story structure at 1007 South Charles Street has lost its historic integrity, but the applicant should explore preserving the storefront cornice. 1009 and 1011 still retains its historic integrity, and 1013 South Charles Street still retains its historic integrity as well. Here are a few of the photos of the structures. As you can see, here is the shell remaining behind 1007 South Charles Street. This is the building that only retains its first floor cornice. And we're asking the applicant to retain just the storefront cornice here. Here is inside 1009 and 1011, which has been consolidated. The party wall has been removed. Here's the current conditions of the interior. So this building is open to the elements. Here's the second floor, which does not have a ceiling or a roof. Here's some of the conditions. All right, here is the existing brick. It may be historic, but yes, it's hidden behind particle board. All right, here's a few holes in the roof of the current conditions of the interior of the storefront space. Here's some more photos of the damage. All right, so I will go back to the recommendation, and any questions or comments, commissioners?
Tariq, thank you.
Thank you.
Sir?
I have to say, I'm finding it really hard to follow this discussion without a clear diagram of the different, either in plan or in elevation, of which property is which. Unfortunately, the verbal descriptions, even though, that's great, but I just want.
I want to do the same thing.
Yeah, so for any future agenda item where we have multiple properties, I would just ask that we always have a very clear diagram that says, we can look at, that says this is this building and that's this building, because I'm half lost.
Gotcha.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Does anyone else have any comments or questions for Tariq?
Well, I had the same one, but I think I puzzled it out, so I wanted to ask a couple of questions, if we can just see the overall picture of the yellow properties with the gray property. Sure. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so the gray property is 107, and then the two-story, 4 windows, that's 109 and 111. And then one.
What's the 111 part?
It's just that it was 2 that was combined.
Okay.
They were
Tariq, is that what
2
they did, 2
skinnies that
and
got
turned to
combined
1?
into 1.
2 window bays is 1,009 and 2 window bays.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
All right.
And then the little guy that has no windows in it on 1013 South Charles has had its windows removed, but basically would look like the building next to it.
You
The ones that you can still see them, they're filled in.
Okay, this is 10,007.
Yep.
Yep.
This is 10,009, 10,011.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
And 10,013.
Yep, and then you see the window ghost?
There?
Yeah.
Second floor
Yeah.
and
I can see
back
it.
as
Yeah,
well.
so
Okay,
that building would look like the building next door to it.
right.
Yeah.
Yes, I see that.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, I wanted to unpack that and make sure that that was the correct understanding, yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes, K-Pop.
Why don't you go to the bird
Well, the back, if you look at the sandboard maps, is all alley houses.
Let's go back to
Yeah, the 1890 sandboard map still shows the alley houses that are still extant up the block, so. Then they go away, yeah.
So Tariq, gray house, and then the additions in the back of the, you're saying recommendations to be gone? So L, the L shape, okay. Does anyone else have any questions for Tariq? If there are none, Tariq, thank you. We have, Tariq, is the applicant here?
Yes.
Okay. And for the record, just give your full name. Yep. Tariq, thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
My name is Tom Priebus. I'm an attorney. I represent Mr. Schofer. Was on the Planning Commission as of August, but I'm just a regular lawyer again because I'm not on the Planning Commission anymore, in case there was any confusion. I'm joined today by Mr. Tim Pula of CapEx, who's an architect and our architect on this project. And thank you for letting us present today. I have to say, I'm a little bit confused, as you are, in part because there are certain factual clarifications that I'm going to ask Mr. Pula to present because certain aspects of what was presented, I think, doesn't fully reflect the architectural aspects of the building, and so we'd like to clarify those. In addition, when we went through the recommendations, and I read the report, which we only received yesterday, I don't actually understand the recommendation that was made just now that was something about restoring holding the storefront. This is a hearing one. My understanding is that the review is for historic significance, and that the question presented, I guess you could say, is, does this building have historic significance sufficient to warrant further CHAP review, or these buildings in some sense, I should say, in this instance. This notion that we're going to recommend that the storefront be kept, but the rest be demolished, I didn't know that we were there, and I don't read that in the recommendations of staff, even though that's what was just presented orally. If we take a look at section 2.2, which is what staff used in evaluating our property, and I'm gonna come back to this after Mr. Pula goes. Staff said that it relied on two specific criteria elements in determining the historic nature of the property. One, that they are associated with events that have made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of Baltimore history, and three, that embodies the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method construction, or that represents the work of a master, or possesses high artistic values. I won't finish it just because you guys know this probably by heart. I didn't hear anything about contributing to the broad patterns of Baltimore history within the report or in the oral presentation. In fact, the greatest extent I might have heard is that Mr. Schofer, the Schofer's furniture store may have used this building at some point for their surplus store. But as a practical matter, and I've dealt with MHT in the past too, if someone tears something down, there's often like a monument or some indication of the fact that it had been historic at one time. And in this case, there's no greater indication of Schofer's furniture store's presence in this area than the actual furniture store, the showpiece building that's across the street. I don't know if my slides are available. But if you could go to slide 2, I can make that point a little bit clearer. Yes, please. Thank you.
It would be the supplemental package.
Yeah, the package that we sent you.
Called the
Yep, that's it. Yep. And the only, look, it's not that important. The only point I wanted to make using that was that the building across the street has undergone substantial renovation at substantial cost. It is a great condition. It is architecturally significant in my, much more so than the supplemental store or the surplus store. The surplus store was acquired at some point in the history of chauffeurs and became a surplus store. But as staff pointed out, there's been a lot of change. The structures no longer fit. Chauffeurs, it's not the work of a master. It's lost a lot of its historical significance based on a lot of alterations that have happened over time. Some of those being demolition alterations and some of those being just natural attrition, changes in the neighborhood. Even the storefront of these properties, which I think has some level of interest, I think, but those are 1950s or so additions. Those are not historic to sort of the historic Federal Hill District and the 1800 building. The other thing which was shown on one of the slides, and Mr. Poole will speak to this more, but that building is in really bad condition. And so renovating, and it sits in the middle of that parcel. And so you're talking about, as a recommendation here, a finding of staff that the piece on the right is not historic, the piece on the left is not historic, but the piece in the center is historic. And I'm not sure how you do that. I mean, in many ways, none of it, I don't think, really is historic here. And to try and renovate that center parcel without, I mean, this is a little bit beyond today's hearing, but to try to do that without, and have the demolition on the side has like almost no practicality from a redevelopment standpoint and would be insanely costly to do that way. So I think that would be a real challenge to do, and I'm not even sure that's what staff's recommending here. So anyway, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Poole to clarify some of the architectural points. But as an initial matter, I think this inquiry is historic, and I'm not seeing that in this. I mean, we also went through we had the benefit of the super block and all of the architectural significance there. And I mean, if you just think about any one of those buildings compared to this building, you're seeing a great difference in terms of architectural significance and need for CHAP intervention. So let me turn it over to Mr. Poole at this time.
Are they going to really testify in tandem, or can we question each of them independently?
Well, we give them 10 minutes, of course, to speak and present, right, Eric? And then after that, the board, yeah. It's all good, Ann. You're fine. You had, what's his name again?
Yeah, I'd like Mr. Poole so I presented sort of our legal position, let's call it, and then Mr. Poole wants to just speak about the architectural aspects. And
That's
some
fine, and then after
factual
that, we'll give
differences.
the commission opportunity to questions.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. So Tim Pula with CapEx Advisory Group. We are consultant to the chauffeur family. They asked us to come in and take a look at this overall property, its condition, what could potentially be done with it. For a little clarification, well, I'd like to consider myself an architect. I never graduated, so I'm a recovering architect, sort of, but I'm a developer. And one thing I will say is that in my 27 years of doing this in Baltimore, 6 of those projects have been very significant historic adaptive reuse projects. So I know a little bit about this, and I take it very seriously. I would not recommend tearing something down if I really didn't think it was the right thing to do. So, one, I want to clarify that the large building in the center, which we refer to as 1009, and we heard 1009, 1011. I think that actually it is one building, not 2, it was originally two lots, 1,009 and 1,011, and somewhere in the history, those two lots came together to form 1,009, and that building was built. But okay, well, I didn't have the Sanborn, but I'll tell you that looking at the building itself, there's no indication, that it was two buildings. So I mentioned that, we are charged with looking at not just the physical structure, its integrity, the architecture, its integrity, the historical integrity, but we're also charged with looking at how can this be redeveloped so that it's no longer a vacant parcel and it's once again economically viable and contributing to Federal Hill and to the overall city. So I have to look at multiple factors. When I look at this building in the report, I would agree that there is original fabric remaining on 1,009 and 1,013 on the Charles Street facades. What I question is the significance of it architecturally. And there's nice brickwork on 1,009, but it's very common. It's very common brickwork. There is no distinct masonry ornamentation. There's no distinct significant example of masonry craftwork on either of those two facades. And the same goes for the cornice on 1,009. It's a nice cornice. There are tens of thousands of them throughout the city. So I don't find that those are distinctive or significant in any kind of architectural way. They're quite common. I will point out that there is no, this was not necessarily discussed in the report, so I'm not saying that there was a mistake. I just will point out that on 1,013, there really is no cornice. It's literally like a 2x4 or a 2x6 that's been, if you look really closely, it's been affixed to the front of the building, and the roof material and the flashing wraps down over it. So there is no cornice of any significance there. So I think the main point is, from an architectural and perspective, there's nice brickwork, there's nice cornice work, but they're not significant features. It's all quite common and found in many, many thousands of buildings throughout the city. And as I mentioned, I have to look at these buildings holistically, which means from an economic perspective. I know that's not the point of this hearing. I think redeveloping this site with those two buildings, which is what I think the report is saying, which is different from what I think we heard in the oral presentation, that is not economically feasible from the standpoint of finding uses, programmatic uses that could function in that space in an economic manner.
And if I could just, as part of before the questioning, right before the hearing, Mr. Costello sent a letter in support. I didn't know if we could just read that to the committee, or if
Is there a letter? Was
it
that a
was
letter
placed
sent?
in the record.
Hold on one second.
I was copied on it. That's just how I know.
At 1:22 p.m.
Okay.
Yeah, he's in support of the demolition, 1,009 Charles Street. All right, we will put his email on the record.
Okay.
Okay. I could read it if you, may I? I'll pull it up and read it.
Yeah, go right ahead. Go ahead and read it.
Here it is. Dear Commissioners, I write to express my support for the first hearing demolition application of 1,009 South Charles Street in of various addresses that are subject to the application. The property sits at the heart of Federal Hill and cannot be redeveloped in its present condition. I've been personally involved in trying to facilitate the redevelopment of this area, and I am keenly aware that no redevelopment of this parcel is possible without combining these parcels and providing the opportunity for comprehensive development plan, especially under current market conditions. The building itself is not fit for occupancy without substantial, very expensive renovation, and even if renovated, this space is not conducive to the needs of a modern tenant. Although I appreciate the CHAP staff report, I do not agree that the building in the center of the site, 1009, I'm not sure, is that right? Yeah, okay, has historical significance using the standard on page 4 of the CHAP report. The building was significantly altered in the 1950s by including a large storefront window that is not original to historic Federal Hill architecture from that period. The building is nondescript and served only as a surplus warehouse to the main chauffeur store. No historic event is noted in the CHAP report, and to the extent chauffeur's furniture is part of the Baltimore history, history is fully captured in this showroom. The citizens of Federal Hill and City of Baltimore are better served by placing this important parcel back into productive reuse. And this small modified building is not historic in a significant sense that demands further CHAP review. For these reasons, I respectfully request CHAP approve the application, essentially.
Thank you for sharing.
Yep.
In the essence of time, I want to ask commissioners, do you have any questions for the two gentlemen? Okay, thank you both. On our list, we only have one person to testify. Tom?
Christopher.
So who's,
Oh, Tom Previs is the lawyer.
Tom already went, okay. Chris, come on. Thanks. Yep, and remember, you have 3 minutes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Hi. The chauffeur application must be,
Give your full name, first and last.
I'm really a nervous public
This
speaker,
is all good.
sorry. My name is Chris Hyde, and I'm director of the Baltimore Preservation League. The chauffeur application must be denied. The chauffeur application is a classic case of demolition by neglect. The properties under review today are historically significant and should be preserved. The chauffeur family has been on a tear recently, literally asking the city to demolish building after building in their real estate portfolio. For 90 years, the chauffeurs benefited from Federal Hill furniture shoppers. Now they're trying to tear it down. This is the second building they've tried to demolish, but this one's a little different. This one's in a CHAP district. For many of those 90 years, the chauffeur family neglected their properties and allowed them to deteriorate. This is the opposite of what we want from a CHAP residential or consumer owner. The chauffeurs were poor stewards of their property portfolio, particularly 1009 South Charles Street. In fact, their negligence was so bad that in 2018, part of the building fell down and had to be restabilized. This all happened under the chauffeur family's watch. We shouldn't reward willful demolition by neglect by approving this request. We should send a message loud and clear that CHAP will not allow property owners and developers to play games with CHAP's rules, and that demolition by neglect is wrong. Again, we ask that the committee recommend against chauffeur's application for demolition. These buildings are historically contributing even after 90 years of neglect. Thank you.
Chris, thank you so much. Tyree, can you take us back to your recommendation page?
Yes.
Before we even get into making a decision, I want to give the commissioners opportunity to have a conversation. Okay, pal.
I just have one comment to say.
Yes,
that,
sir.
If you guys look at the Google, the one thing that you want to keep in mind is that that street is pretty maintained. It's pretty well maintained, preserved, and very intact. So once you blow this one out, that breaks it pretty. So regardless of the condition of the buildings, I would employ to also look at the street. The entire street is pretty much maintained. So.
Thank you, sir.
And then
Who else? Ann?
I just want to make a couple of clarifications because there does seem to be some miscommunication. This is demo hearing 1. All that we're here to do is to talk about whether the building is significant or not. And that's not an act of judgment or how fine the building is. These are buildings in a CHAP district, and they are from the period of significance. Now, I don't know if this neighborhood was inventoried or if it's just defined by a definition. but sometimes the buildings are individually listed in an inventory, but we typically go back to rely on the period of significance, and these buildings are firmly within the period of significance. So I want the development team to clearly understand that this is not ever going to be a matter of taste. It's really about historic time periods, and that's not necessarily even like significance. This doesn't have to be by somebody notable to fit within that in a historic district. And that's been my understanding. And can I have confirmation from staff that that's the correct understanding?
Yes, that's our understanding, and I'd have to go back and check, but I do believe that the period of significance for the local Federal Hill Historic District goes through the 1950s. I don't know, maybe, I don't know if Lauren could double check that through the report.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, it goes at the beginning and the late.
Thank you, Ann. Anyone else? Okay, we have the recommendations in front of us. Commissioners, and I'm not going to read them this time. For the recommendations, do we have anyone on the commission who would like to put the recommendations on the floor for a vote?
I did have one edit, though.
Yes, sir.
You know, for demo hearing one, I don't think discussing retaining cornices of a building that we may be calling non-historic is applicable here. So with that one edit, I would move on staff's recommendation that 1009 and 1011, as well as 1013 retain historic integrity. 1007 has lost its integrity and can be demolished, and the rear additions fronting onto Patapsco Street could be demolished as well.
Duly noted. Thank you, Peter. Anyone else? Okay. Tyreek, you had something to say?
The storefront, we have, CHAP in the past has issued an ATP for the retention of the storefront corners, just to mention.
Okay.
So it was intentional to retain it.
Understood. So after Peter's recommendation for us, and with the recommendations, who would like to put the motion forward?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I'm sorry, could we just get clarification about what the motion?
My
Are we
motion is
keeping
that
this?
1013, 1009, and 1011 retain historic integrity and must be retained. 1007 has lost its integrity and strike anything about the cornice. And the structures fronting on Patapsco Avenue have lost integrity and can go.
Thank you.
Sir, would you like a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstain? One abstain? One abstain?
Which one is? Okay.
The ayes have it. Tariq, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioners, thank you. Any old business? Any new business? I would like to wish you all a happy holiday. Be safe, enjoy time with yourself and your family, and I enjoy the year with you. Meeting is adjourned. I call this meeting until closing at 2:59 p.m. There we go. Meeting adjourned.